You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. What makes it different? I think the biggest answer, and it took me a long time to come to this conclusion, is it seems so egotistical, but what makes it different is you, because there's only one of you. That's what makes your podcast stand out, because it is difficult to make your podcast different to 250,000 other podcasts, but there's only one of you.
The hardest thing is to say something in 30 seconds. It's easy to say it in an hour, but try to say it in 30 seconds. So what you're saying, I'm going to pick up on that one.
Don't do a podcast about everything, because then it becomes about nothing. Welcome back to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Niall Mackay. In this podcast, our aim is to make podcasts better. And in this episode, I'm going to give you another podcast audit. I started my first podcast in 2019 as a hobby. And from there, I went on to develop 7 Million Bytes podcasts, where we work with podcasters all around the world to help them make better podcasts. In fact, we've worked with over 40 podcasts and produced over 700 episodes now. In this audit, I'm speaking to someone who is a professor emeritus at Bergen College in New Jersey. He's been involved in radio since the 1970s, and he dabbles in podcasts as well as being a puppeteer. My guest today is the host of the Mr. Radio podcast, which gives you a clue what the podcast is about. And my guest today is Marshall Katzan. Thank you very much for joining and agreeing to have your podcast audited today, Marshall.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.
So you've been involved in radio since the 1970s. What has been the biggest change that you have seen in technology? Because I was talking to somebody yesterday about how AI in just the last few years has revolutionized podcasting. What's some of the big changes that you've seen?
Oh, a lot of changes. So I started out recording on reel-to-reel tape, and changes before that. I had a student who was recording with a wire recorder, and he was one of the people who reported that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and he did a recording on wire recording, and he edited that with a cigarette ash. So we've moved from editing with cigarette ashes to having virtual AI edit for us.
One of the things that I learned recently, which blew my mind, was the phrase, the cutting room floor, because we talk about cutting stuff. And I learned that the cutting stuff comes from the phrase, literally people would have to go through reels of tape and cut it. And by the end of the day, the cutting room floor would be filled with these cuts. And then they would have to be literally taped back together, put back into the reel, and then played. And I was like, oh my goodness, when I edit, which I use the script, I literally highlight a sentence or a word, press delete on the computer, it disappears, and we move on. And that takes about a half second. That blew my mind.
The worst thing about that was when you cut some tape and you dropped it on the floor by accident with 20 other pieces of tape that were on the floor, and then you realized you needed that piece of tape. That was a problem.
The other one that I thought was really funny, but so frustrating, was I know when I'm editing, like I'm talking about taking a sentence and then deleting it, right? But sometimes that completely changes the cadence of the sentence because you've cut it somewhere that doesn't make sense. And then I can undo it, redo it, fix it. And even now, AI technology will allow you to change the cadence of the sentence or the ending of the word so it sounds correct. And I heard a story where like a producer or an editor would send the script to a producer, like the transcript, and then he would be like, no, cut this out, move this here, change this around. But when you do that, then it completely changes the cadence and the rhythm of the sentence, but you can't hear that when you read it. And that would cause all sorts of problems as well.
Yeah, that's an important part. I don't use AI for editing. I do it all by listening to it, and the cadence is very important. Having having some room tone in there to fill in spots that you may want to cut out. So yes, cadence is definitely important, and I'm not sure that A- AI is capable of doing that. Maybe it is. I'm not sure.
Descript added a feature called regenerate recently, which you can regenerate a word and it will, and it's not perfect and it doesn't always work, but just that example, like if you were to cut a sentence so the last word doesn't go up or down at the end or fit that cadence, the AI will actually regenerate it to fit into the sentence, which just blows my mind. Again, it doesn't always work. AI is not perfect, but the fact that it exists
Mhm,
is just mind blowing. Well,
mhm.
let's get into the audit. So we always start with the same question. So I have a series of questions for you before we start. So number one is, what equipment do you record with?
Well, I if I'm doing something in the field, I have a Sony digital recorder that I use. Don't ask me model numbers. I can never remember anything with regards to model numbers. But if I'm in the field, I will record with the Sony digital recorder. Then I'll bring it home as a file, and I use a vintage Mac computer OS, I think 10, OS 9. It's Snow Leopard. So that's pretty old. And on that, I have Pro Tools and I have a program called Sound Studio. So I import the files into either Sound Studio or Pro Tools. Then, after I do the basic editing for my programs, when I edit, it's usually a phone conversation. So I use a line output into the computer, and that's set up in my closet behind me. I take that finished file, I bring it to the computer I'm on right now, and I use Logic Pro to tweak it up.
Well, that answers my next question, which was going to be, what do you edit with? Which so that's awesome. Those are tools that I don't know how to use at all. But going back, so when you're recording a phone interview, what microphone do you use? Do you wear headphones? Things. What other equipment do you use?
Okay, so I when I first started doing podcasts, I wasn't interviewing people. I would just go around with my portable recorder and I would record street musicians and maybe talk to them and get a little bit of their audio on the portable deck. So during the plague, I converted my closet behind me and I used my puppet stage as part of the sound deadening, and I bought a Shure SMB whatever model number microphone for that, and I use Sony headphones. Don't ask me the model number. So I have the Sony headphones, the Shure mic for my interviewing. Occasionally, I'll use Zoom, but mostly it's phone lines.
Nice. All right. So you got some good equipment then. That's awesome. So what would you say is your podcast niche?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I try to cover a little bit of everything. So, initially it was street musicians. Then I when I decided, okay, let me call people up and interview them, I decided I'll talk about anything. I'll talk about politics, I'll talk about education, I'll talk about religion, science, industry, arts, and I guess that's my niche, a little eclectic, this and that.
All right. Now, depending on what research you read, there are about 250,000 podcasts published every week. Some research says 400,000. What makes your podcast different than all of those ones?
I wish it was different than all of them. I think my podcast, maybe if I'm lucky, I have 4 listeners. I don't know what makes it
Eh,
different.
that's all right. It's okay. So, what is the goal of your podcast then? Why do you make a podcast?
I've always liked radio. I like recording things. I like editing. and I like talking to people. So I'm not making $1 million on my as a matter of fact, I'm probably spending $1 million on
Yeah,
my podcast.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, so I just enjoy doing it. I'm retired, and this keeps me out of trouble.
So, at the end of each episode, what lessons or values do you want the listener to come away with?
Well, hopefully they had an enjoyable time and perhaps listen to something that they didn't know about. I occasionally I'll get feedback telling me that they somebody never really knew about what I had been talking about. But I look at the analytics and I see that people are listening to it for a minute, 2 minutes. So I really don't know how many people are listening, how much they're listening to, or if it's just a bot that is giving me the analytics that nobody really listened to it, but apparently a bot has made it so that it looks like somebody listened to it.
So, where are you going to for those analytics? I wanted to share with you about one of my favorite affiliate partners, and that is Fiverr. I've been using Fiverr for years for everything from ordering YouTube thumbnails to keyword research, writing podcast articles, even to Canva designs and thumbnails and more. So, whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a podcaster, or anyone in between, Fiverr has got you covered. It really is the go to platform if you want to find freelancers offering a massive range of services to help you on any project. Maybe you need a stunning new logo or just a short animation, whatever you need, you can find it on Fiverr. What I love the most is how easy Fiverr makes it to connect with talented freelancers from around the world, all at prices that will fit whatever your budget is. Plus, with Fiverr's secure payment system, you can trust that your transactions are safe and secure. No dodgy people you meet on Facebook groups that disappear with your money and never give you what you want. What, that's only happened to me? As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you use the link and at no extra cost to you. As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you click my link and you buy something, all at no extra cost to you. And best of all, you will be directly supporting the making of this podcast that you're listening to for free, but it is not free to make. So why wait? Head over to somewhere that you've probably never been before. It's called the show notes. So whatever app you're listening in, if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything at all, head to the show notes, click on my special link, and then you can browse thousands of gigs ready to help you with your next project.
Well, I'll look at I'm on Sound I use SoundCloud, so they tell you how many people have listened to it, where the people are from. Now that podcasts have become videos, which I don't understand, I started doing YouTube videos. The podcast that I asked you to listen to was originally just audio. So now we have to make, I look at the analytics in YouTube. I occasionally look at the analytics in iTunes and then Chartable, and there are a variety of different places that I go and look.
That's cool that you're doing that. What have you noticed any like trends then, or what have you been able to take away from the
Well,
analytics?
the shorter the piece,
Yeah.
the more people are listening to it. I have some pieces that just music that street musicians would
Mm,
do, and that has more downloads or listens than something that I do that I try to make it no longer than a half hour,
yeah.
but the shorter ones seem to be the more popular ones.
All right. Nice. Well, so let me just, in response to some of the things we've just talked about, I think the question, what makes it different? I think the biggest answer that everybody comes to, and it took me a long time to come to this conclusion, is, And it's a difficult one because it seems so egotistical, but what makes it different is you, because there's only one of you. And so I would almost even lean into that more. Make it like this is a podcast that you're presenting because people are listening because they enjoy listening to you. They enjoy what you're producing. That's what makes your podcast stand out because it is difficult to make your podcast different to 250,000 other podcasts, but there's only one of you. So I would lean into that more in terms of making it stand out. The goal of your podcast, it's amazing that you do because you like it, right? You're retired and you have fun doing it, which is really amazing. But you do look at the analytics, so you obviously are interested in that. Do you ultimately want people to listen for longer, or do you want more listeners?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want
Yep.
to get back to what you just said about how the podcast is me. And a good friend of mine, I forced him to listen to one of my shows, and he says, "You don't sound like yourself." So I think you're correct that you really have to sound like yourself. And the analytics, your question was, would I rather have people listen a long time or more people? I think I'd rather have them listening a long time.
No, and that's great. And that's, to be honest, from what I've heard, because all the charts are like proprietary, and so nobody really knows. Being top of Apple charts doesn't mean that you have the most downloads. So it's really difficult. I read an interesting article because they base it also on engagement and growth. So you could have 10 listeners and you go to 100 listeners. So your growth is off the chart. It doesn't mean you now have 10,000 listeners, but you could be number one in the Apple podcast charts because you've had this. They're going to see, maybe it only happens over 1 week, but they're going to see in that week that you've had this exponential growth. They also apparently, again, it's proprietary, so we don't really know what they're looking at, but they also look at engagement rates. And I think that is, I know on YouTube as well, it's more and more important. They're not looking at just how many people press play, it's how many people press play and kept listening for more than 30 seconds, more than 1 minute. I know on YouTube, which is a completely different medium because it's video, but it blew my mind. So on YouTube, when you start to look at the analytics, it tells you how many people are listening after 30 seconds. And it literally says if more than 50% of people who started your episode are still listening at 30 seconds, that is typical. So I have an episode recently on YouTube, which I do as well, was 57% of people were still watching after 30 seconds. And it was like, this is better than normal. And you're like, oh my goodness. So on video, you're expected to lose half of your listeners within the first 30 seconds. And podcasting is very different. But what we do at 7 Million Bytes Podcast, when we're making episodes, and we've only started this in the last 6 months or so, and we've noticed a massive uptick in engagement, is we take the best clips, so maybe even just 3 or 4 sentences, and we move them to the beginning. So we cut them like the cutting room floor, and we make what we call it internally is like the hook. So we create the first 30 seconds. And if you go and look at any of the podcasts we work on YouTube, we put like a filter over it. We add captions to make it really obvious that this isn't the main episode. This is just the intro. Obviously, on audio, we can't add a filter and we can't add captions. But we add music to try and make it obvious and we do just one sentence, just a quick little introduction so that someone listening to this episode gets a teaser. We work really hard on choosing something that is intriguing, even maybe controversial. We don't give the answer away. We try and choose something to go right at the beginning so the listener hears it and they go, "Oh, I want to hear more of this." And so we're trying to focus, yeah, to get that engagement because I think that's what helps be recognized in the charts or maybe featured more on the Apple Podcast app. Again, it's really difficult to know exactly what goes into being featured because they keep it secret, but we work hard on that, on engagement. And so it does take a little bit of extra work if you have the time to do it, if you have the ability with your editing tools, which I'm sure you do, obviously, with using Pro Tools. Just add a couple of little sentences at the beginning to try and hook people and get them listening for longer. And I think that will help your engagement rates for sure.
And you can probably do that for audio as well, just a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
of snippets. And I never thought of that. I think that's a good idea, and I doubt that AI could do that. Do you think?
AI is getting ridiculous. What you could do with AI, so like I mentioned, we use Descript. You could, so actually, yeah, you can. You can put it into the script now and say, give me the highlights. Like anything, and I was talking to Sam Sethi, who's going to be on an upcoming episode. He says we shouldn't call it artificial intelligence. It should be assisted intelligence, which I absolutely love because it will help you find the answer. But ultimately, you need to decide, am I going to use this? How am I going to cut it up? Everything with AI these days just helps you do things quicker. But ultimately, you still need a human being to be able to do it. So I think we do use AI to find these clips. You can ask the AI, like, find me the best clips or the most intriguing ones. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. But for audio, yeah, I mean, so we do it when we make a video or a audio. What we do is we will make the video and then take the audio directly from the video. So we're not creating two different assets, we call them, or two different mediums. We're just creating one thing. So those clips definitely work for the audio as well. So
How long would these clips be? 10 seconds, 15 seconds for the intro?
each clip we try and make the total hook we try and make no longer than 30 to 45 seconds. So it might just be three or four literally sentences. And that's something I work with my editor a lot, and she's so good at it now because in the beginning she'd maybe send like a 30 to 40-second clip. And I'd be like, no, that's too long. That's like, I mean, I'd make fun of her. I'll be like, that's really boring. We need something that's not boring. Sometimes she still does it. She'll send something and I watch it and I'm like, so my biggest question is always, what value is the listener going to get from this? Like, you want something that's a tease that they listen to that little hook and they go, ooh, I want to learn more about that. So sometimes she'll send me something and it's the answer. And I'm like, no, you're already giving the answer away. You're giving the houses away. We just want to tease the listener. And that's how we do it to try and hook the listener so that then they're going to listen for longer because they want to find that answer and they don't know when it's coming as well, right? So if you give that little tease in the beginning, for you, it could be you're about to hear one of the best street artists in Hoboken, New Jersey. Well, they don't know when that's coming, so they're going to listen through to try and find out where it is.
Interesting, because the show that I asked you to listen to, and I don't know why I asked you to listen to that show, but the artist was my mentor, and he worked for Walt Disney, and he told me once it's the hardest thing is to say something in 30 seconds. It's easy to say it in an hour, but try to say it in 30 seconds. So what you're saying, I'm going to pick up on that one.
Awesome. I mean, I'm Scottish and I love to talk. So for me, to try and say something in as short a succinct a way as possible is one of the most difficult things for me because I would rather try and say it in 30 minutes rather than 30 seconds. So completely. So the episode I listened to, it was a walking jazz history. I don't know if that was the one that you said, but because I
Yes,
listened to
yes.
this one. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So when I do, I'll go through this audit. One of the things I do mostly is I'm listening for audio quality because your content is your content. I'm not here to tell you how to do your content, and we do so many different genres that I could never give you a educated opinion on that. But going back to one of the questions I asked when I said, "What is your niche?" So one of the things was you one of the biggest things that people say in podcasting is you need to choose a very specific niche and niche down on that. And so in your intro, in your about section, it says that you will interview about anything: politics, education, religion, science, industry, or the arts. Now, I would give advice if you want to make your podcast more successful, choose just one of those things because you want people. One of the biggest things about podcasts is that there's so many podcasts, and go into Spotify or Apple Podcast and type in everything and anything, and you will see about 1,000 podcasts that are about everything and anything. And it's one of the things I coach people on the most is don't do a podcast about everything because then it becomes about nothing. But in your case, because you have such a background in radio, if you want to make your niche you, then you can cover all those topics, but I would change your about section to say, this is a podcast by Marshall Katzan, who's been involved in radio since 1970. Have a couple of things in there about you specifically. Even your title, I would change it to Mr. Radio by Marshall Katzan or with Marshall Katzan. So people see that right away, like make it more about you. So if people know who you are or they want to get to know who you are right away, they see your name, they look at the about section because you're thinking about when people are scrolling on their phone and they're searching for something, they're searching for religion. and then your podcast comes up. What makes yours stand out? So right now, Mr. Radio, and then you look at the about section and it's about everything. If they're looking for religion, they're going to say, oh, no, I want something more specific. What was the other thing you said in there?
Politics,
Politics,
education.
science, industry. So all of those things, if someone's looking for one of those things, they're going to see, this is about everything. I want something more specific. But if you put in Mr. Radio by Marshall Katzan, they say the about section. I've been in radio. I like to talk about all these topics, blah, blah, blah. Because so I love radio. I listen to radio every morning. To be honest, I listen to the podcast version of the radio show, but they talk about everything and anything. I listen to it every day because I love their personalities. So that can definitely work, but you've got to lean into it. Like the radio show I listen to is called The Matt and Jerry Show. It's about them. You know it's about them. So you join for the personality. So I would suggest your niche be yourself. I'm not suggesting that you choose one of politics, education, or religion. Make it yourself, but then really lean into that. So even your artwork, make it bigger. Your picture was quite low resolution when I looked at it. Make it a high resolution picture. Use your iPhone, get the best picture you can. Have your face bigger. I've literally just actually redone my artwork, which is haven't changed it in years. And for the first time, I put my picture on it, which I had never done before because I didn't really want it to be about me. But the more I'm doing this, you realize that people listen to podcasts and radio because they like you. So I'm kind of leaning into that. So I've just changed my artwork and put my picture on it, which is not something I naturally would want to do. But I just changed it last week, so I'm gonna track the listeners and see if it makes any difference. It might make no difference. But so to go the other question was as well, when I looked through your Spotify, how often do you post your podcast?
It depends. I would say, well, during the plague, I was doing it more, a couple of months, but now I'm working on a sort of a documentary, so that's been keeping me occupied. So I really, I'm not, I don't post every Monday at 3 a.m. in the
Yeah,
morning.
yeah. And that is the biggest piece of advice to grow your podcast, get more listeners is consistency. And I also like to say not just consistency in terms of posting, consistency in terms of audio quality, consistency in terms of what you talk about. One of the podcasts that I know of, I don't listen to it because they always change their format. One minute he's doing like a documentary style piece, then the next he's doing it's just him, then the next one it's a panel of 4 people. And so I never really know what his podcast is about, even though I know it's good quality and he's a good presenter. So I would say aim for consistency in everything. If you can aim for consistency in terms of publishing, I saw when I looked, it looked like it was around every 2 weeks. If you can try and do a regular schedule of Monday at 3 a.m. every 2 weeks, something like that. It is hard work. I know that myself from doing podcasts. For my main podcast, my most successful one, I've done seasons, so I've recorded maybe 10 or 12 episodes. I don't have like a fixed amount of episodes. Again, it's just based on how much time I have. I don't make any money from that podcast either, so it's based on how much time I can give to it. But I'll do a season of 10 or 12 episodes. I've taken breaks for 3 months before because I just don't have the time or the energy to make any more podcasts. And then I'll come back with another season. So I'll make a season of 10 or 12 episodes, take a break, sometimes for up to 3 months, and then come back. And I don't lose any listeners from that. So I would just look at your consistency of when you're podcasting.
So maybe record podcasts, have a bunch of them, and then once a week
Absolutely.
instead
Yeah.
of uploading it, waiting a couple of months, and doing another one. Okay.
100%. And even get on a
Mhm.
schedule. So this podcast that we're doing, Smarter Podcasting, I've been terrible with this, been really bad. I was doing publishing whenever and wherever I could because wasn't publishing consistently. And partly was when I first started, I was going to aim for every 2 weeks. And then I listened to Adam Shively, who's an amazing podcasting business coach, and he was on this show and he said, "Oh, you should publish every week." So I was like, "All right, I should do every week." But then that became too much. And then I ended up not publishing at all. I'm now back on a regular cadence, but it's every 2 weeks because I can manage that with all the other podcasts that I make and work on. So try and choose something that you can fit. If it's only once a month, do once a month, but make that a regular date time that you're going to publish. So going into the quality of it, there was a few things in here I think you could definitely do better. So on the walking jazz history, one of the things I could hear at just even in at 20 seconds was mouth noises, and that can happen when you have a really good microphone. So if you have a Shure microphone, if your mouth is a little bit dry, maybe if you've eaten some food before, you can hear that. Like I won't even do it into the microphone, but that kind of like mealiness from your mouth, which it does come from really good microphones, and I've noticed that. So look out for things like that. Have a glass of water before you start. I thought, right, so the introduction for the guest for me was too long. It was about a minute. And if you remember, before we started this episode, I said, tell me three things about yourself. So that's my way of introducing someone is just do one, two, three, then give their name. And it gets the audience intrigued as to who it's going to be. Normally, the listener really, the guest like yourself really enjoys it as well. I found that your introduction was so long, I found myself tuning out and there was too much information to take in. So, for example, like I said to you, and I sent you the prep form, how do I introduce you? I think I even said in the prep form, give me three things. But then you sent me a link to your resume. And when I looked at your resume, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so long. I mean, so intriguing. But I hear it not just on your podcast, on lots of different podcasts where they will almost read the guest's resume. You know, they'll be like, in 1970, they went to this college of this. In 1975, they won an award. And they'll go on for ages. And it just really loses. Again, we're talking about trying to get listeners to listen for longer. So my advice would just be do 3 bullet points that really sum up the guest and then straight into it. And then there was again, I told you a couple of things. At 1 minute, I could hear something, I think, being dropped, maybe. I'm not too sure exactly what it was. There was a point where you could hear papers being moved around. So again, background noise like that. And one of the problems that a lot of people have, and it's really difficult to overcome, was that the guest's audio was really bad as well, which is really difficult because we as podcasters have the Shure microphone and we have the closet and everything set up for a good podcast. And then we invite guests on and then they use the laptop microphone or a terrible microphone. And so, I've edited a podcast before where the guest was outside recording. And I was like, oh my goodness, because you could just hear the wind going by in their microphone and things like that. So it's a really common thing. You can prep for it by just, giving the guest a little bit of coaching before, be somewhere quiet. Even right now, you're wearing iPod headphones. Those are perfect. Those are so much better than using your laptop. So give them little coaching points like that. Like if you have any type of headphones, put them on, AirPods, no, anything like that at all is gonna help as well. Um,
Well,
yeah,
spoiler alert,
yeah.
that that guest is deceased, but that was an interview that I took a microphone and put it on the, uh, the receiver part of my telephone and recorded it on an audio
Uh,
cassette.
that makes perfect sense, and that is exactly that's exactly what it sounded like. Yeah, no, that makes sense. There's another bit where you cut to the audio of a female speaking, and I don't know if that's the part you're talking about, but the quality is so poor you can barely understand or barely hear what she's saying.
Yeah,
Um,
that was from a VHS tape,
right.
that that recording.
That makes sense then as well. And then there was a part where the music was too loud while someone was speaking. So just making sure the music levels ducks down when somebody's speaking because it made it really hard. Made, read, made it really difficult to understand what they were saying. And I think this maybe comes from your radio background, but there was a parts that I found that the music played for too long in between people speaking. Because for me, podcast is all about people talking, and I know some people want to tune in for music. Maybe it just needed a bit of a preparation or saying, like, we're going to listen to music for a little bit if you wanted to play that for so long. Because when I listen to a podcast, I'm expecting to hear people talk, and then this music played for quite long in between people speaking. So that kind of made me tune out a little bit as well. There was a part where you were talking and there was a buzzing sound that was going on as well. So again, maybe in some sort of post-production that could be helped. And then at 6 minutes, it cut to a speaker with really bad audio as well as well. So just kind of overall some quality issues. And I think for me, audio quality is more important than the content because I will turn off a podcast as soon as I hear things like buzzing, papers dropping, and using things like Pro Tools and Assure SMB, you obviously have amazing equipment and audio editing software. So all of that can be fixed in the pre and post production as well. But overall, I mean, you can obviously tell you have a background in radio. Your episodes were really well researched as well, which I know takes so much time as well to go and do that research and then present it. And it was really well presented. So just a couple of things on the quality there to look out for that can elevate it to, and I find that word elevate now, I used to love that. For me, audio quality is more important than the quality of your content, because if I turn on a podcast and I hear things like papers being rustled, things being dropped, I can't hear the person, I'm going to turn that off right away, which is a real shame because it means no matter how good the quality of your content is, you're going to lose listeners. So if you want to keep listeners listening, get more listeners, for me, the audio quality is the number one thing. And that's why when we work on podcasts, we do our best to make it sound as good as possible. But again, I'm just one person that's giving advice. You can probably talk to somebody else and they'll tell you the complete opposite to what I'm saying. But I hope that helps.
Oh,
And you can
very,
use it.
very much. And especially the hook, the 10, 15 second hook at the beginning. That's an idea I'm going to have to incorporate.
Awesome. Well, so send me your new episodes when you've got them so I can hear these changes. Let me know any other changes you make in terms of like the cadence or the rhythm of the podcast, how often it comes out, the consistency. Keep me updated. I mentioned about changing the about section and the artwork to make it focus more on you, which I know for me is just such a weird thing to do. But I've been podcasting for so many years now. I've started to learn that, yeah, like I mentioned, people come for you. So you do have to kind of lean into that a little bit. But I'm sure as a radio presenter that you're used to that as well. So keep me updated, and thank you very much for letting me
Well,
audit
thank
your
you.
podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed this and I learned a lot.
Perfect. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Thank you very much to Marshall Katzan for being a guest today. If you want a podcast audit, then just send me a message. Make sure you go back and listen to our past episodes as well. We want to help you make the best podcast possible. And please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, turn on notifications, all of that good stuff so other people can find this episode. I hope you got good value out of it. And if you did get good value from it and you think it's worthwhile, the best thing that you can do is share it with another podcast. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of Smarter Podcasting. Have an amazing day. Thank you, Marshall. Cheers.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, a highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.